Malcolm shoved his key into the lock of his penthouse door in the heart of Manhattan, his heart pounding with the anticipation of surprising Bryce after 3 grueling weeks on a business trip to Tokyo. The last thing he expected was the muffled sound of voices coming from the master bathroom, voices that made his stomach drop as he quietly pushed the door open and stepped inside, only to freeze at the sight before him. There, under the soft glow of the vanity lights, stood Bryce, his boyfriend of 3 years, wrapped in a tight emotional embrace with another man. Malcolm recognized the guy vaguely as Ryan, one of Bryce's old college buddies who had always been the supportive type. But the way Ryan's arms held Bryce close, the way Bryce leaned into him with tears streaming down his face, hit Malcolm like a freight train. Bryce clutched a crumpled envelope in one hand, his shoulders shaking, while Ryan murmured something soothing that Malcolm couldn't quite catch. The air felt thick, charged with something raw and private that Malcolm had no part in. His briefcase slipped from his fingers and thudded against the marble floor. Bryce's head snapped up, his green eyes widening in pure shock. "Malcolm? Oh God, you're home early." He pulled away from Ryan so fast it looked like he'd been burned, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Ryan stepped back too, raising his palms in a gesture of innocence, but the damage was already done. Malcolm's mind raced through every late-night call he'd missed, every weekend Bryce had spent visiting friends, every time he'd asked Malcolm to keep their relationship hidden just a little longer for the sake of Malcolm's billion-dollar tech empire and his conservative Texas family. Was this what it had all led to? A secret life Bryce was living behind his back? What the hell is this? Malcolm's voice came out sharper than he intended, echoing off the tiled walls. His chest tightened, a mix of anger and fear twisting inside him like a knife. He had flown back early specifically to tell Bryce the truth, that he was ready to come out, to face the board, the media, even his parents if it meant they could finally stop pretending Bryce was just his roommate. The surprise was supposed to be the start of their real life together. Instead, Ryan cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, man, it's not what it looks like. Bryce called me because he needed someone to talk to. He's been struggling and I was trying to help." But Malcolm barely heard him. His eyes stayed locked on Bryce, on the way his boyfriend's shoulders slumped in defeat, on the envelope that now looked like a confession waiting to explode. Bryce took a hesitant step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Malcolm, please. Let me explain. I wasn't cheating." Ryan straight, "For God's sake." He drove over because I texted him in a panic. "I was going to tell you everything when you got back. But the timing. God, the timing is always wrong with us. Isn't it?" His words tumbled out, laced with exhaustion and something deeper, something like resignation. Malcolm felt the floor shift under him. 3 years of stolen weekends, hushed phone calls, and careful public distance flashed through his mind. He had built walls so high to protect them both, and now those walls were cracking right in front of him in the one place that was supposed to be their sanctuary. The 3 men stood there in the spacious bathroom, the running faucet from the sink the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Malcolm's mind screamed for answers, but his mouth wouldn't form the questions. He had always prided himself on control, on reading every room, every deal, every person. Yet here he was, completely blindsided by the man he loved more than anything. Ryan muttered something about giving them space and slipped out, leaving the 2 of them alone. Bryce reached for the envelope on the counter, his fingers trembling as he held it out. "This is why. I wrote it last night. I was going to leave it for you because I can't keep doing this anymore. The hiding, the fear that one day you'll choose your family or your company over me. I love you, Malcolm, but I'm drowning in it." Malcolm took the paper, unfolding it slowly. The words blurred at first, but then they hit him. Bryce's neat handwriting laid out every buried pain. The nights he cried alone after Malcolm canceled plans because of a family dinner or a board meeting. The constant worry that their love would cost Malcolm everything. The growing sense that staying meant sacrificing his own chance at living openly. It wasn't a breakup letter exactly. It was a plea for change, wrapped in love so raw it made Malcolm's throat close up. He looked up at Bryce, really looked at him for the first time in what felt like forever. The man standing there in jeans and a simple gray t-shirt wasn't the carefree photographer Malcolm had fallen for at that art gallery opening 3 years ago. He was tired, worn down by the very secrecy Malcolm had insisted on. I came home early to tell you I'm ready," Malcolm said finally, his voice cracking for the first time in years. "Ready to tell everyone. My parents, the company, the world. I thought surprising you would make it special." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Instead, I walk in on this and suddenly I'm the one who feels like the outsider in my own home." The words tasted like regret. He had always told himself the hiding was temporary, a necessary shield. Now, seeing the toll it had taken on Bryce, he wondered how he had missed the signs. Bryce stepped closer, but the distance between them felt wider than the ocean Malcolm had just crossed. They moved to the living room in silence, the city lights of New York twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows like distant stars mocking their pain. Bryce sank onto the leather couch, running his hands through his sandy hair. Ryan was just listening. He's the only one who knows besides us. I was breaking down because I got a call from my sister yesterday. She suspects something, and she warned me that if word gets out, your investors might pull out. She said people like us don't get happy endings in your world. His laugh was hollow. I started thinking maybe she's right. Maybe I should set you free before I ruin you. Malcolm paced the room, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood. Every step echoed the conflict raging inside him. Part of him wanted to pull Bryce into his arms and promise everything would be okay. Another part, the part shaped by years of Sunday sermons in Texas and boardroom whispers about family values, whispered that coming out now could cost him the company he had built from nothing. His parents back in Dallas still sent him newspaper clippings about traditional marriage and asked when he was bringing home a nice girl. The thought of their disappointment, of losing the inheritance that funded half his ventures, made his stomach churn. Yet looking at Bryce, at the quiet strength that had always grounded him, Malcolm felt something shift. This wasn't just about him anymore. The night stretched on with halting conversations and long silences. They rehashed old arguments. The time Malcolm had introduced Bryce as his assistant at a charity gala, the vacation they canceled because a paparazzo might spot them, the way Bryce had smiled through it all even when it hurt. By the time the sun began to creep over the skyline, exhaustion hung between them like fog. Malcolm finally sat beside Bryce, their knees touching for the first time since the bathroom. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "But I don't know how to do this without everything falling apart." Bryce nodded, eyes heavy with unshed tears. "Then maybe we need to figure it out together. Or maybe one of us has to be brave enough to walk away." The words lingered, a quiet threat that neither wanted to face. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Malcolm realized the real surprise wasn't the scene in the bathroom. It was the realization that their love had reached a breaking point, and only one path forward remained: truth or goodbye. The next morning brought no easy answers, only the harsh light of reality filtering through the penthouse windows. Malcolm called in sick to the office for the first time in his career, something his assistant noted with obvious surprise. He and Bryce sat at the kitchen island nursing coffee that neither really tasted, the envelope from last night lying open between them like a third person in the room. Bryce traced the edge of the paper with his finger, his voice steady but tired. "I wrote it because I was scared, Malcolm. Scared that if I waited any longer, I'd resent you. Not for who you are, but for what we can't be." He looked up, meeting Malcolm's gaze directly. "Remember how we met? That gallery in Chelsea. You bought my entire series on urban loneliness without even haggling. I thought you were just another rich guy looking for art to impress clients. But then you stayed and talked about the photos like they meant something personal. That was the first time I felt seen." Malcolm remembered every detail of that night. The way Bryce's laugh had cut through the crowd, the spark in his eyes when he explained the inspiration behind each shot. He had been dating women then, or at least pretending to, keeping up the image his family expected. But one conversation with Bryce had cracked the facade he had spent 32 years building. They had kept it secret from the start, meeting in out-of-the-way places, texting in code, stealing weekends in remote cabins upstate. It had felt exciting at first, like their own private world. Now it felt like a cage. "I never meant for it to trap you," Malcolm said, reaching across the counter to take Bryce's hand. The touch sent a familiar warmth through him, but it was edged with fear. "My parents. You know how they are. Dad still calls my company his legacy, even though he retired years ago. Mom sends me Bible verses every Sunday. If they find out, it'll kill them. And the board? Half of them are old-school investors who already question my single status. Coming out could tank the stock." Bryce squeezed his hand but pulled away after a moment, standing to pace the kitchen. "I know all that. That's why I almost left. Ryan helped me see that staying hidden was eating me alive. He's been through his own stuff with depression after his divorce, and he just listened. No judgment. But when you walked in, I saw the look on your face. You thought the worst because we've built everything on secrets." His voice cracked slightly. "I love you enough to walk away if that's what protects you. But I don't want to. God, I don't want to." The honesty in those words hit Malcolm harder than any argument. He stood too, crossing the space between them in 2 strides and pulling Bryce into a hug that felt desperate. They stood like that for long minutes, the city humming far below, until Bryce murmured against his shoulder. "We need a plan. Not more hiding. Something real." That afternoon, they drove out of the city in Malcolm's black SUV, heading north toward the Hudson Valley for space to think. The car ride was filled with memories and what-ifs. Bryce recounted his own coming-out story from college, how his parents in Ohio had eventually accepted him after months of silence, but warned him the world wouldn't always be kind. Malcolm shared stories of his youth in Dallas, the football scholarship he lost when rumors started, the way he had buried himself in work to prove he was normal. By the time they checked into a quiet inn overlooking the river, the misunderstanding from the bathroom felt like a distant catalyst rather than a wound. Yet the underlying tension remained. Over dinner on the terrace, Bryce asked the question Malcolm had been dreading. "What if we tell your family first? Just them?" Small step. Malcolm's fork paused midair. The idea sent ice through his veins. His parents were flying in next month for the company anniversary gala. One wrong word and everything could crumble. Back in the room that night, they talked until the early hours, mapping out possibilities like a business deal. Bryce suggested therapy together, a neutral space to unpack the years of secrecy. Malcolm countered with a trial period of subtle changes, introducing Bryce as more than a roommate to close friends first. But as they lay in the king-sized bed, backs touching but minds miles apart, Malcolm felt the weight of every choice pressing down. He had always been the decision-maker, the one who closed million-dollar contracts with a handshake. Now, the biggest decision of his life felt impossible. Morning brought rain, mirroring the uncertainty. They returned to Manhattan quieter, but something had shifted. The bathroom incident had forced them to voice fears they had buried for years. Malcolm spent the afternoon in his home office, staring at family photos on his desk. His parents smiling at his college graduation, his sister with her husband and kids. He picked up the phone 3 times to call his mother but hung up each time. Bryce, meanwhile, retreated to his darkroom in the spare bedroom, developing photos from their last trip together. When he emerged with a print of the 2 of them laughing on a beach in Maine, he handed it to Malcolm without a word. The image spoke volumes. Happiness captured in secret, now demanding to be seen. By evening, a fragile truce had formed. They cooked dinner together like old times, laughing over spilled wine and inside jokes. Yet when Bryce's phone buzzed with a text from Ryan checking in, Malcolm felt a flicker of old jealousy. He pushed it down, reminding himself it was platonic support. "Tell him thanks," he said quietly. Bryce smiled, the first real one since the bathroom. "We're going to be okay. We have to be." But as they cleared the table, Malcolm caught his reflection in the window. A man torn between the life he had built and the one he wanted. The next day brought the first real test. His assistant called about an emergency board meeting. One of the investors had heard rumors about personal issues affecting leadership. Malcolm's blood ran cold. Word was spreading faster than he could control. He glanced at Bryce across the room, packing his camera bag for a freelance shoot. The secret was already leaking, and the choice was no longer theoretical. It was here. The boardroom on the 45th floor of the sleek glass tower in Midtown felt colder than usual that morning. Malcolm sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his tailored suit impeccable, but inside he was unraveling. The investors had questions, veiled at first, then direct. "We've noticed some distractions lately, Malcolm. Personal calls during Tokyo negotiations. Is everything all right at home?" The word home landed like a grenade. They didn't know about Bryce. Not yet. But the rumors were circling like sharks. Malcolm deflected with data projections and growth charts, his voice steady from years of practice. Yet when the meeting ended and he stepped into the private elevator, his hands shook. He thought of Bryce waiting back at the penthouse, probably developing more photos or researching galleries for his upcoming show. The man who had become his anchor was now the source of his greatest fear. Back at the apartment, Bryce sensed the tension immediately. "Bad meeting?" he asked, setting down his camera. Malcolm nodded, pouring a scotch even though it was barely noon. "They know something's up. Not the details, but enough to poke." He downed the drink in one gulp, the burn doing nothing to ease the knot in his chest. Bryce crossed the room and wrapped his arms around him from behind, resting his chin on Malcolm's shoulder. "Then maybe it's time. We talked about this. Small steps, remember?" His voice was calm, but Malcolm heard the underlying plea. They had spent the last week rebuilding after the bathroom shock. Honest conversations over late dinners, walks in Central Park where they held hands only when no one was looking, even a joint therapy session with a discreet counselor downtown. Progress felt real yet fragile. Malcolm turned in Bryce's embrace, searching his face. "What if telling them costs me everything? The company funds half the charities you love. My sister's kids' college funds are tied to the trust. I can't just burn it all down." Bryce stepped back, hurt flashing in his eyes. "And what about me? Am I just collateral damage in your empire?" The question hung between them, echoing the pain from that first night. Malcolm reached for him again, but Bryce moved to the window, staring out at the bustling streets below. "I got a call from my parents today. They want me home for Thanksgiving. I told them about you vaguely, said you're a close friend. They asked why I've never brought you around. It killed me to lie again." His shoulders tensed the same way they had in the bathroom that night. Malcolm felt the guilt rise like bile. He had dragged Bryce into this half-life, promising change but always finding excuses. Now, with the board sniffing around, excuses were running out. That afternoon, Malcolm flew to Dallas on a last-minute trip, leaving Bryce behind with a kiss that felt like a promise and a warning. His parents greeted him at the family ranch with open arms, the sprawling estate unchanged since his childhood. Over steaks on the patio, his father clapped him on the back. "Proud of you, son. That Tokyo deal was a masterstroke." His mother smiled warmly. "Any special lady we should know about? You're not getting any younger." The words twisted like a knife. Malcolm forced a laugh, changing the subject to the company anniversary gala next month. But that night, alone in his childhood bedroom, he pulled out his phone and stared at a photo of Bryce from their main trip. The man he loved was thousands of miles away, waiting for a decision Malcolm wasn't sure he could make. A text came in from Bryce. "Miss you already. Therapy appointment tomorrow. Think about us." Malcolm typed back a simple, "I am," but deleted it 3 times before sending. The next day brought the confrontation he had dreaded. His sister cornered him in the stables, her voice low and urgent. "I heard whispers at the country club, Malcolm. People saying you're living with some guy in New York. Is it true?" Her eyes searched his, filled with a mix of concern and judgment. He froze, the smell of hay and leather grounding him in the past while his present crumbled. "It's complicated," he muttered. She shook her head. "Complicated doesn't pay for Dad's medical bills or keep the family name clean. Think about what you're risking." The words echoed in his head the entire flight back to New York. Landing at JFK, he felt changed. The ranch had reminded him of roots he couldn't easily sever. Yet Bryce's texts throughout the day had reminded him of the future he craved. He arrived home to find Bryce cooking pasta, the kitchen filled with the aroma of garlic and hope. They ate in silence at first, then talked deep into the night about boundaries and timelines. Bryce suggested a trial coming out to one trusted board member. Malcolm agreed, but the fear lingered. As they fell asleep tangled together, Malcolm whispered into the darkness, "I choose you. I just need time to make it stick." Bryce's soft reply was all the answer he needed. "Time is all we've ever had." The week that followed tested that promise. A leaked photo from a charity event showed Malcolm and Bryce standing too close, sparking online speculation. Malcolm's assistant fielded calls while Bryce fielded concerned messages from his own circle. The pressure mounted, cracking their fragile peace. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Malcolm snapped at Bryce over a minor thing, the argument escalating until Bryce slammed the bathroom door, the same one where it had all started. Malcolm stood outside, heart hammering, remembering that first shock. He knocked softly. "I'm sorry. This is my fault." Bryce opened the door, eyes red but determined. "Then fix it, or let me go." The ultimatum wasn't angry. It was exhausted. Malcolm pulled him close, the embrace mirroring the one he had interrupted weeks ago. In that moment, he made a silent vow. The crisis was forcing growth neither had anticipated, but it was growth nonetheless. Bryce's world felt smaller with every passing day. While Malcolm battled boardroom whispers in the city, Bryce threw himself into his photography, shooting street scenes in Brooklyn that captured the isolation he felt inside. His freelance gigs kept him busy, but the camera couldn't hide the truth. He was tired of being the secret. That Thursday, he flew to Ohio to visit his parents. The small suburban house, a stark contrast to Malcolm's penthouse. His mother hugged him tightly at the door. "You look thin, honey. Everything okay with that friend of yours?" The question was innocent, but it stung. Over coffee in the kitchen, Bryce finally cracked. "He's more than a friend, Mom. Malcolm's my boyfriend. We've been together 3 years." The silence that followed stretched like taffy. His father set down his mug, face unreadable. "We always suspected. But 3 years? Why hide it?" Bryce explained the pressures, Malcolm's family, the business risks. His mother teared up. "We just want you happy. But if he's ashamed, maybe he's not the one." The words lodged in Bryce's chest like stones. He left the next morning with their cautious support and a promise to bring Malcolm home someday. Back in New York, he found Malcolm waiting at the airport, flowers in hand.